Good morning. My name is Anthony McGrath, and welcome to V for Vegan. This is a podcast designed for those who are interested in saving themselves and the planet. In this issue, lovingly called Franken Foods, we will speak about mankind's ability to ignore the real issues and plump for anything that will cause distraction. Once again, I encourage you to buy the accompanying book, 14-Day Vegan, on Amazon plus the book of recipes. Please read and review, subscribe, and consider becoming a patron of this podcast. The importance of your support at this time is paramount. Be the change. Families are wonderful, aren't they? During a video conference call with family, I was asked why I had become a vegan. I replied that I could no longer support the system, which basically was Auschwitz for animals morally and ethically unclean. Our family member then asked, "What about meat grown in a lab?" It is a great question, and one on a very detailed level would lead one to discuss whether or not consciousness and ownership extend to an individual's cellular level. Most will not go there. My instantaneous recall was a science fiction short story that I'd seen in which companies were devising new ways of producing boneless meat, and they had a solution that they could inject into an animal that would dissolve all of its bones, and therefore obviate the need for slaughter. Needless to say, in the scientist in the story, the inventor of this crazy method ended up being injected with his own solution. That is Karma Baby. When I was at university, I would have been arguing for the scientific approach because, at the time I had dreams, we would be on an interstellar flight growing food using hydroponics without soil. And if we could grow flesh without the need for the entire animal to be present, that would represent a remarkable achievement. Indeed, that may be the only viable option for this technology other than the doomsday funding that will come from the Department of Defense. It was a great question causing me to research the issue. There are a number of companies in this space, and some are trying the humanitarian spin, and it goes as follows. Imagine biting into a juicy burger that was produced without killing animals. Meat grown in a laboratory from cultured cells is turning that vision into a reality. Several startups are developing lab-grown beef, pork, poultry, and seafood, among them Mosa Meat. Mark Post is the chief scientific officer. Memphis Meats is now known as Upside Foods. Supermeat is in Israel, and Finless Foods, where Brandon Chen is the chief technology officer. The field is attracting millions in funding. In 2020, for instance, Upside Foods, the company says its latest funding round has brought in $161 million in new investment from sources that included Bill Gates, Richard Branson, and Kimball Musk, as well as two giant players in the animal protein and feed space, Cargill and Tyson Foods. In an interesting metamorphosis, Memphis Meats specializes in supplying services to improve the way meat is cleaved. The spin. If widely adopted, lab-grown meat, also called clean or cultivated meat, could eliminate much of the cruel, unethical treatment of animals raised for food. It could also reduce the considerable environmental costs of meat production. Resources would be needed only to generate and sustain cultured cells, not an entire organism from birth. The meat is made by first taking a muscle sample from an animal. Technicians collect stem cells from the tissue, multiply them dramatically, and allow them to differentiate into primitive fibers that then bulk up to form muscle tissue. Mosa Meat says that one tissue sample from a cow can yield enough muscle tissue to make 80,000 quarter-pounders. A number of the startups say they expect to have products for sale within the next few years, but clean meat will have to overcome a number of barriers if it is to be commercially viable. Two are cost and taste. In 2013, when a burger made from lab-grown meat was presented to journalists, the patty cost more than $300,000 to produce and was overly dry, from too little fat. Expenses have since fallen. Memphis Meats reported this year that a quarter pound of its ground beef costs about $600. Given this trend, clean meat could become competitive with traditional meat within several years. Careful attention to texture and judicious supplementing with other ingredients could address taste concerns. To receive market approval, clean meat will have to be proven safe to eat. Meanwhile, traditional meat producers are pushing back, arguing that the lab-generated products are not meat at all and should not be labeled as such, and surveys show that the public has only a tepid interest in eating meat from lab. Despite these challenges, clean meat companies are forging ahead. This has now happened in a small way. The U.S. Department of Agriculture granted its first ever approval of cell-cultured meat, produced by two companies, Good Meat and Upside Foods. Both grow small amounts of chicken cells into slabs of meat, no slaughter required. It was the final regulatory thumbs up that the California-based companies needed in order to sell and serve their products in the USA. Around 90% of the US population eats meat regularly, but a growing number of Americans harbor concerns about the current meat industry's environmental impact, which accounts for about 14.5% of global carbon emissions. Massive livestock operations can also be breeding grounds for harmful antibiotic-resistant bacteria. What's more, they generate tons of waste and can pollute local waterways with nutrient runoff from manure. And the animals themselves often live relatively short lives, confined to cramped cages and standing in their own filth. We think the current way of producing meat is at the very tip of the spear of all these harms, says Good Meat CEO Josh Tetrick. Still, people are drawn to eating meat for a variety of reasons, such as cultural significance and tradition, or its nutritional value as a protein source, not to mention its taste. Cultured meat companies, which bill themselves as sustainable and cruelty-free, hope their products will offer a way for meat lovers to enjoy a juicy burger or fried chicken with a clean conscience. I put myself in that category, says Amy Chen, COO of Upside Foods. We call ourselves conflicted carnivores. This is another example of the need to be chic and hip, overcoming common sense. There is no conflict, just habit. Sugar tastes good, but eat enough of it and you become diabetic. Should we label them doubtful diabetic? The process. When it's time to start production, food scientists submerge the cells in a stainless steel vat of nutrient-rich broth containing all the ingredients cells need to grow and divide. After a few weeks, the cells begin to adhere to one another and produce enough protein to harvest. Finally, the scientists texturize the meat by mixing, heating, or shearing it. Good Meat uses an extruder and press it into a nugget or cutlet shape. The overall production process is relatively simple, says Vita Santo, Good Meat Cell Agriculture Director. The biggest challenge right now is definitely building the manufacturing capacity, he says. Upside Foods CEO Omi Chen concurs. She says, but now that both companies have USDA and EFTA approval, they can start to build up the infrastructure to cultivate enough meat to ship products across the USA. Until recently, in order to kickstart the cell division, the growth of the meat, about 20% of the aforementioned growth medium had to be fetal bovine serum, drawn from the blood of a cow fetus. Not only is the serum prohibitively expensive, which slows down the development of widespread availability, for now, their cultured chicken will only be available in a couple of restaurants. Bar Cren, a Michelin-starred restaurant in San Francisco, will serve upside food. Celebrity chef Jos Ander S. will serve the company's cultured chicken at one of his restaurants in Washington, D.C. If cultured meat is both slaughter-free and better for the environment, will any vegetarians adopt it into their diet? We have a range of views, says Richard Masselwain, Chief Executive of the Vegetarian Society of the United Kingdom. Some vegetarians are stoked about the prospect of cell-cultivated meat, but about half would prefer to avoid it, according to one poll. Acceptance is a little higher for the rest of the public. Nearly 2/3 of US citizens are at least willing to give lab-grown meat a try. For folks who keep a kosher or halal diet, the issue is a bit less clear-cut. In 2021, Indonesian Islamic authorities ruled that cultivated meat was not halal, though other Muslim leaders are open to the possibility of halal certification depending on how the cell lines are harvested. A cell cultivation startup based in Israel is currently seeking market approval for its kosher-certified meat. When the products do hit supermarket shelves, Chen says, they will actually bear the stamp and seal that you expect on a piece of meat, a little round tag certifying USD inspection. The labels will also include the prefix cell cultured, and they will lack an official vegetarian stamp of approval. The Vegetarian Society's standpoint is that lab-grown meat doesn't qualify as vegetarian or vegan because it contains cells originally sampled from an animal. The organization, however, will consider creating a new label to certify it as cruelty-free or slaughter-free, Musselwain says. I think it's going to need its own criteria, he adds. But we are very excited about cell-cultivated meat from a societal perspective. The underlying bottom line here is they also want the money that such endorsements would bring. Shameless whores that they are. This is kin to the way in which the American Diabetic Association promotes crazy food from its sponsors, foods known to be harmful and to cause type 2 diabetes. The environment. Cultivated meat is not necessarily good for the environment. It's true that the traditional methods of bringing meat to market drive irreversible climate change, but lab-grown meat presents a slightly different problem. It sucks up a massive amount of energy. There's not a lot of research on that, especially the kind not funded by startups or their industry associations. That said, a few recent studies have shown that there's cause for concern. The Alt Protein Industries Good Food Institute has most recently claimed that in a decade, lab-grown meat could have a smaller environmental impact compared with conventional cattle production if renewable energy is used. Their study estimates roughly 80% fewer carbon emissions, in addition to less land gobbled up. But if cultivated meat uses traditional energy sources at scale, a 2015 study found that it would be worse for the planet than conventional meat production. In another paper, announced last month as it awaits peer-reviewed publication, researchers found that the environmental impact of lab-grown meat could be 4 to 25 times worse than the average beef sold at supermarket. Patent wars loom. Plant protein pioneers Impossible Foods and Motif Foodworks have been locked in a prolonged, but not bloody, battle to determine who has the right to make non-meat burgers a certain way. The same could easily happen in the no-kill space. Each startup has its own proprietary formula. Some are backed by patents. Others are trade secrets. Lab-grown meat does nothing to address economic problems around food. 40 million Americans don't get enough to eat, and lab-grown meat won't do a thing to lighten their burden. The price to produce the food is too high, and it may never come down enough. That means investors are targeting only the super high-end versions of lab-grown meat, like no-kill ribeyes, tenderloins and lobster tails that will sell for more than ordinary fare, such as chicken nuggets or burgers. The vast majority of people wouldn't spend $50 on a lab-grown burger, but some of them might be persuaded to spend that on a ribeye. That means this technology is being funded and scaled up mostly for the consumption of the wealthiest. Let the 40 million eat lab-grown cake. The other considerations. There is a saying that the future has arrived, it is just not evenly distributed. Richard Fleischer's Soylent Green is a good, solid science fiction movie, and a little more. It tells the story of New York in the year 2022, when the population has swollen to an unbelievable 80 million, and people live in the streets and line up for their rations of water and Soylent Green. That's a high-protein foodstuff, allegedly made from plankton cultivated in the seas. But is it? No. As the lead character finds out, it is made from human flesh being recycled. Interestingly and possibly absurdly, a company called itself Soylent and now claims the world's most perfect food. They say we hacked food. Soylent has created the most nutritionally complete, convenient, and sustainable food on the planet. And yes, it tastes amazing. What makes it perfect? Founded by software engineers and backed by 10 years of development and 4 clinical research studies, Soylent has the perfect synergy of ingredients to provide your body with exactly what it needs. It's perfect. Science-backed nutrition. Voted best tasting. Affordable. Sustainable ingredients. Convenient formats. Perhaps they have, but they did not think about marketing. So while we are here, let's go further into left field of crazy options open to us. Coprophagia is the ability to eat one's own fecal matter. Certain species have exploited this as an evolutionary edge. On average, the human body produces about 50 g of solid, that is to be excreted. The major bulk of the content of this excretion is dead intestinal cells, insoluble carbohydrates, fiber, and whole grains, and bacteria. We'll look into each of these things more closely. Dead intestinal cells. Your intestines are lined with millions of finger-like projections called villi and microvilli cells, which absorb food. The small intestine is more responsible for absorbing food than the large intestine, which mostly absorbs water and therefore has more of these cells. The typical microvillus has a half-life of about 2 days, and then it dies. It is replaced with a new one, and it is eliminated in our waste. Insoluble carbohydrates, lots of these in the system. Bacteria. There are millions of bacterial cells in your body, most of which are in your intestine. On average, a human will have 10 times more bacterial cells in their bodies than their own cells. A lot of these are beneficial and help us digest foods we typically wouldn't be able to digest on our own. But, as is the fate of all cells eventually, the bacteria die and then are eliminated in our waste. Is this a sci-fi plotline? Population boom equals food shortage? Solution? Synthesize food from human waste matter. Absurd, yes. But Japanese scientists have actually discovered a way to create edible steaks from human feces. Mitsuyuki Ikeda, a researcher from the Okayama laboratory, has developed steaks based on proteins from human excrement. Tokyo Sewage approached the scientists because of an overabundance of sewage mud. They asked him to explore the possible uses of the sewage, and Ikeda found that the mud contained a great deal of protein because of all the bacteria. The researchers then extracted those proteins, combined them with a reaction enhancer, and put them in an exploder, which created the artificial steak. The meat is 63% proteins, 3% lipids, and 9% minerals. The researchers color the poop meat red with food coloring and enhance the flavor with soy protein. Initial tests have people saying it even tastes like beef. Again, the spin is that the meat packing industry causes 18% of our greenhouse gas emissions, mostly due to the release of methane from animals. Livestock also consume huge amounts of resources and space in efforts to feed ourselves, as well as the controversy over cruelty to animals. Ikeda's recycled poop burger would reduce waste and emissions, not to mention obliterating Dante's circle for glutton. The scientists hope to price it the same as actual meat, but at the moment the excrement steaks are 10 to 20 times the price they should be thanks to the cost of research. Professor Ikeda understands the psychological barriers that need to be surmounted, knowing that your food is made from human feces. They hope that once the research is complete, people will be able to overlook that ugly detail in favor of perks like environmental responsibility, cost, and the fact that the meat will have fewer calories. Again, this technology might be really useful if it could be scaled for use in the space station. Otherwise, it should and does remain the classification. Just because you can do a thing does not mean that you should do a thing. The primary issue still remains that converting protein into animal flesh or cells is an absurd and highly inefficient use of energy. Unless you are a full-blown carnivore, then you have no choice. Even if you are an astronaut, being or becoming a vegan makes sense. Why would you waste time and energy to try and create a substance that tastes nothing like the real thing, if you can remember what the real thing tasted like? Food today is the product of its environment and processes. It tastes nothing like the food my taste buds remember from the 60s. When you put all of the health benefits on top, third less heart attacks, actually reversing heart disease, elimination of type 2 diabetes, reduction of arthritis by 2/3, and reduction of dementia. Why not funnel the time and effort into truly sustainable natural solutions, rather than the continued extension of patented sources of revenue to the crazy rich? All of these so-called solutions are distractions. The answer, as per Occam's razor, is always the simplest. If you have any questions, please email me. Thank you for listening. Please consider buying the book 14-Day Vegan and its accompanying recipe module on Amazon. Like, subscribe, or become a patron of this podcast. But by far, the best compliment is to tell a friend and have them listen. Remember, you may not be able to change the system, but you can change what you do. Until next time,
This has been a production of Spirit Quest Publications, a division of Anthony and Mary Holistic Health Services, LLC. All rights reserved.